Opioid-related deaths in teens and young adults in Ontario tripled in just 7 years. A new report sharing alarming numbers, particularly in youth aged 15 to 24. It also reveals drug treatment rates that have significantly decreased. Joining us this morning with more is this principal investigator of the Ontario Drug Policy Research Network, Tara Gomes. Good morning.
Good morning.
So from 2020 to 2021, there were 169 opioid-related deaths among people who are aged 15 to 24. That increased from 150 deaths the year before. That number also represents so many families who have lost loved ones. What are the factors behind this jump?
Yeah, it's such a concerning number to see because, we haven't really studied this population in great depth before. When we look at the circumstances around these deaths, there are really two things that stand out. One of them is that about half of the time, the young people who are losing their lives do have an opioid use disorder diagnosis. So, most people would call that an opioid addiction. However, only about a third of the time have they actually accessed treatment for that diagnosis in the last year. And so we're really concerned about the accessibility of the treatment programs that we have across Canada and here specifically in Ontario, as well as whether it's really meeting the needs of young people. There's a lot of really rigorous requirements to go to the pharmacy every day. You might not want to tell your family members about your substance use, and that can be a real barrier for people. And we also see that about half of the time people don't have one of these diagnoses, which suggests that a lot of these deaths are also happening in people who are more occasional or recreational drug users. These are primarily deaths that are being driven by fentanyl in the illicit drug supply. So they are not being driven by prescription opioids. They're really being driven by this illicit drug supply, which is really unpredictable. So if you're accessing an unpredictable supply, your body isn't used to those drugs. It can be very, very dangerous when you're using drugs occasionally as well.
And as we're learning from those numbers, it can also be fatal. The research also highlighted that treatment for opioid use disorder is on the decline, and then the harm from opioids in younger Canadians, would make sense, is going up. What do you hope that health officials and policymakers take from this research?
I think we need to really come together and recognize that all parts of our population are being impacted by this unregulated drug supply, and that specifically in our younger populations, we need to tailor the programs and services that we provide to their needs. We need to make sure that the treatment that we provide is accessible to them, that they have peer support workers, so peers who are in their age group who can talk to them about harm reduction, about the drugs and the supplies that exist and how to keep themselves safe if they're using drugs. Because I think we know that, young people will use drugs. We hope that, they will use them safely and that they will, not use very dangerous drugs. But the reality is this is a time of life when a lot of people do use drugs for many reasons. And so we need to make sure that we have services available so that they have the education and the tools that they need to keep themselves safe and their friends safe as well if they are using drugs.
We know that BC has been hit particularly hard, especially with fatalities. I remember during the pandemic, even 3 years ago, they called them the parallel crisis of the pandemic and opioid use. Earlier this year, BC then became the first province to decriminalize small amounts of hard drugs. This was their way of trying to deal with the overdose numbers. Has it made a difference?
This really, as you mentioned, was only implemented early this year, so it's really hard to measure a difference that quickly. What we do know is that, there's strong evidence behind decriminalization approaches. We know that when you criminalize substance use, people end up in prison for having drugs on their person, for example, and they might not be able to access treatment in prison. And then when they're released from prison, it's a period of extremely high risk of overdose because people have lost their tolerance to the opioid that they were taking. And we also know that by criminalizing drug use, we push people into the shadows. We have people, that stigma increases. People are much less likely to talk about their substance use with their families, with their healthcare providers, and it can make it much more difficult for people to access the services that they need. So certainly, I think that is a step forward in British Columbia, but we need more time to really see the effects of it and to really make sure we understand the best form of decriminalization moving forward in British Columbia and across the country.
Continues to be a problem of increasing alarm in this country. Tara, thank you for breaking it down for us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you liked this, be sure to subscribe here, or you can check out more Your Morning videos right here.